It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in, Take Command podcast. And truth be told, we just talked for an hour. It was a great show. But there's something that we wanted to just hit off the top here, Logan, to make sure that everyone's on the same page on two key things for the Deebo Samuel trade. First and foremost is this trade is not official yet. This trade will be officially processed when the new league year opens. So that is March 12th, which is, I'm sure really fun if like you're a player. I don't think you ever had to deal with that. You were never traded. Were you at the combine, then had to wait 2 weeks?
Never had to do that, but I'm sure it's a weird technicality with regards to the rule. So
that's technically still pending, and they got to do the physicals and all that kind of stuff too. So the chances that it falls apart, very slim, but for official proceedings, we will remind you that trade is still pending. The other thing, too, because we didn't get into this, the contract, and I talked about this a little bit on the emergency pod the other day, but the Commanders are, as of now, going to take on the full $17 million in salary for Deebo in 2025. They could theoretically agree to an extension and move some of that money around, but that seems to be the plan right now. There's then $31 million of dead cap money. All the void years that were on Deebo's contract get moved up and become dead money for San Francisco this year, but that's their problem, not ours. So with that, plenty of conversation about Deebo, and then we got into the 10 guys that move the needle on the NFL draft. Here's the show we did that needed the disclaimer. What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command podcast with so much to get to on the heels of the NFL Combine. Logan Paulsen there. Craig Hoffman here. We got a trade to talk about. We got prospects to talk about. And we're going to start with the trade, but then we will get to 10 prospects who moved the needle at the NFL Combine in a little bit. Logan, first of all, how was your trip for Indy? We did see each other. We did not get a chance to really do anything because we were ultimately two ships passing in the daytime of the Indianapolis Convention Center.
Yeah, I mean, that first day for us was kind of exemplified the whole trip, man. Like, we got in a little bit later than we thought. Our flight was delayed, so we didn't get our credential right away. That's when you saw me running around taking a tour of the Indianapolis Convention Center. Then they misplaced some of our stuff. So it was just like we were just kind of running around the whole time. So it was a fun trip to kind of see some old friends, some coaches that I know, some scouts that I know, which is always a good time. And it was great to see the prospects. I really thought this year I came out of the evaluation period being like, man, like this, maybe the top isn't as good as it was last year, but there are some guys in the middle, like second to fourth round, maybe fifth round, that you feel like could be good football players and be starters and be contributors to your team. So it's always fun coming out of the combine, seeing that. And the one-to-one stuff is always fun. So overall good, but there was a lot of kind of logistical stuff that just was a huge headache. So glad to be back home and glad to be doing this podcast with you.
Yeah. So I was watching the coverage Saturday night on TV when all of a sudden they tossed to Ian Rappaport and they're like, you know, the San Francisco 49ers have traded wide receiver Deebo Samuel too. And I'm like, this is about to change the trajectory of my day or not. And they said the Washington Commanders. And I was like, time to go do a live stream. And then off I went on that. So yeah, man, how did you what was it like being in the building? Cause you were watching the workouts, right? When this trade gets
announced. I was watching the workouts.
So this is just like start kind of, going around the building. Like who told you, how did you find out? And then we'll get into the analysis piece.
So yeah, we were actually sitting next to this guy named Jeremy Green who hooked us up big time. Basically, like we lost all of our podcast stuff for the show that I do for the team, the Ticket to the Draft show. And so he let us come to his house and use his stuff. And he was a great dude, but he's sitting there and he just whips out his phone and goes, "You guys got Deebo Samuel?" And I was like, "What?" And the guy right in front of him turned around and is like, "You work for the Commanders?" And like it just like immediately like kind of not like a wildfire. It was like the second the Twitter notification happened, everybody in our immediate vicinity was like, "You guys got Deebo? What's going on?" Like what? And I was like, "You guys are technically breaking this to me because it happened before they did the segment in the stadium." So obviously we kind of talked about it, we Googled it, and then they did that little hit with was it Rappaport who did it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It was up on the screen and he kind of talked through it. And then they've got the subtitles underneath because they don't have any audio in the stadium because they don't want to distract the people working. But it was very fast, very quick. And I thought, well, we'll talk about this when we talk about this on the Take Command show. But you know what I mean? Like it was kind of it was of the moment of that day, big time. And then obviously, like everything with the NFL, people just move on and they go into different stuff. So especially from different markets.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because it does exemplify so much what the combine is about. Like there is these workouts that are happening that are very important for the players. They're very important for the scouts, and they're a piece of the draft puzzle. But ultimately, so much of the combine is the NFL gets together, and that allows for discussions that may not happen with that kind of speed or that kind of intensity in other places. The timeline of the league year being just a couple weeks away, and I'm guessing that Adam and John Lynch, like, they might have been at a restaurant or one of their hotel rooms or the JW Marriott Starbucks, where that I guess would be the second most interesting thing that happened this week, even involving Ian Rappaport. If you know, you know. Like, however this conversation went down, they get the deal done, and ultimately it's Deebo to Washington for a 5th round pick. What's your initial reaction of what this means for Washington, and what kind of questions do you have about this move?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. Like, for people who have never been to the combine and you're huge football fans, you guys should definitely give it a shot one year, kind of as like a football mecca, because it gives a lot of context to that stuff that Craig was just talking about. It's like literally every executive, every agent, every coach is here for a certain amount of time. And you see so many conversations, so many like agents kind of like, for example, I've got a really good friend who's an agent, and I'm trying to get lunch with him. He's like, "Oh, we'll go at 12." And it's like, "Can we go at 1? I got a meeting with this GM." It's like, "Oh, let's go at 2. I got a meeting with this GM." And you're like, and they're just going through their list of guys. And again, that's part of the deal there. But in terms of the Deebo thing, I think, my mind went through a bunch of different iterations. And initially I kind of was like, oh, Deebo looked, he was fine last year, but nothing special. And again, that's why one of the reasons why the trade's even available for them at this point. But then the more that I thought about it, the more I was like, watching through the film, I watched all of 2024 and all of 2023, and just watching his 2023 stuff, I just thought like this could be a lightning rod for this offense, kind of best case scenario. And I think like, what does this offense do well? It does a really good job of getting guys in space. They run a ton of quick game. And like, what if you were able to increase the efficiency of that by 15 or 20% and not have to do anything schematically different, right? Just get a different person in there. And so the reason I say that is because when you watch Deebo on film, like, is he the most nuanced route runner? No. Is he the most short area quick? No. But is he absolutely dominant with the football in his hands, like breaking tackles, making people miss in space? Like, is he maybe the best space player in the NFL at times? Yes, 100% true. So like when I see him, forget the game, against Philadelphia, catch like a little slammer screen to the offensive left and then break it for 40 yards in 2023. I'm like, the Commanders run that same play. They run that a lot. Or what about the little bubble that he caught versus the Giants that he makes 2 people miss and then runs for 40 yards for an explosive play? He had 26 explosives in 2023. He had 19 last year, right? So think about just adding a couple explosives to an offense on very little schematic change. Like, you're just doing what you do, right? He runs a lot of deep digs. We run a lot of deep digs. We run a lot of bubbles and like little reverses and shovel passes. He did a ton of that in San Francisco. We do a ton of that here. So to me, it just feels like, again, I think I had to kind of shift my thought process from like thinking like wide receiver, right? Because he's not really that. Like when you watch him, he's like a souped up running back. And I don't mean that as an indictment of him or a criticism of him. Like, that just speaks to what he does well. Like, when the ball's in his hand, he's electric. He runs like a runner. Like, he's got that kind of ability. Again, the nuanced route running stuff is not always there, not always super high level, but like he runs, again, deep digs. He can run a go. He can run some corners and posts. Like, is it what you want him majoring in? Probably not. I want to find the easiest way to get him to touch the football and then just let him go, because people have a hard time tackling him.
He is good enough as a wide receiver that defenses will treat him as a wide receiver. And that's an important threshold to hit, right? It's not like, Cordero Patterson at this point in his career, right? Like, that's actually a pretty interesting comp for Deebo in terms of usage. Yeah. He's been converted more to full-time running back, but like Cordero Patterson just wasn't ever really good enough as a receiver that defenses really feared him in that way. And then all of a sudden he started playing running back and was like, oh, this guy's pretty good at running back. It's almost like the dude with the kick, with the kick return skills. Put the ball in his hands and let him act like a kick returner. He might be good in not special teams. And Deebo's got a little bit of that, but he's more souped up as a receiver to where he can run those deeper digs. He can hit you on some of those routes down the field, but that is definitely not where he is. I think Keim had this stat on his show that since they both entered the league in 2019, Deebo has like 9 passes of 25 or more air yards caught. Terry has 26, I think were the two numbers. So he's not a guy that's going to get down the field on those posts, on those corners, especially on those go balls. You just loft it out there and let him run underneath it. He was a 4.48 guy coming out of South Carolina, and I doubt he could run a 4.48 now. It's just realistically not where he's at. But he, unlike a lot of guys who lead the NFL in explosive plays, will catch the ball, run through people, and get the 25 plus yards or whatever, 15 plus yards, whatever the threshold is for whichever version of the explosive play stat you're using to get those explosive plays. And that is something this offense had at points last year. Like Diami did a decent job of that at times. Eckler did a decent job of that at times. But like, what if you melded those two into one player? And that's kind of what you have now in Deebo. It doesn't solve your wide receiver 2 problem. They still need to figure out someone who's going to line up outside opposite of Terry on most snaps. But we talk about adding juice to the offense. They've added juice to the offense as long as he comes in shape, and we can talk about that more in a second.
Yeah, and I think, we talked a lot about, I was doing my draft prep, talking about Xavion Williams from TCU, the receiver. He's 6'3", 222, ran a 4.49 at the combine, excuse me. And he's got that running back receiver crossover. And I thought, man, that would be great if you drafted him to, again, kind of soup up the running back position, soup up a little bit at the wide receiver spot, but he's not a true wideout. And to me, this is kind of the same thing, except you've got a guy who's done it at the NFL level and is very, very good at it. Now, I don't know how much he'll be playing running back in this offense. I do think it's something they should definitely explore. I think it's something that, like, again, you want to be more explosive. You want to kind of maximize his ability. And to me, he's a guy that I think it would be excellent. So again, like, there are some issues with him, and again, I want to bring this up because it's important to understand this. He wouldn't be available if there weren't issues, like, just to be clear, right? And like, we're acknowledging that. However, like, even if he plays like he did in 2023, like, he will be a huge net positive for this offense, especially for a 5th round pick. And everyone talks about the cost, and I understand he's making a lot of money, but really, like, that's a very competitive receiver number. I think he's like the 19th or 20th highest paid receiver in the NFL. So it's not like you're
17 million and it's a 1-year commitment, and you're about to unload John at 16 and a half. Like, you're basically, if they wind up getting a 5th for John Allen, which I don't know if is going to happen, but let's pretend for a second, you would have had a wash on the picks and basically traded Deebo and $500,000 for John Allen.
Right. And I think
I'll take that for this team 10 out of 10 times.
And especially if you can get him. And again, like, I'm not saying he was bad in 2024. I think the whole offense was struggling in 2024, and it didn't maximize anybody, And so, but in 2023, like, man, he did some, like, really special stuff. Like, and I don't like to overhype guys, but I was watching the film. I was like, man, that's an incredible play. And it was like a couple of plays later, oh, that's an incredible play. And it was like, that's who he was. He had like a 6 or 7 game stretch in 23 where he just looked dominant. And it's not like he's running this. It's not like watching Justin Jefferson. It's like, here's a slammer screen, like a screen at the line of scrimmage where, like, Trent Williams is going to come out and block for you. And I'm going to make the first guy miss. Trent's going to block the second guy. I'm going to outrun this dude, stiff arm this guy, and then run for a touchdown. And I was like, man, like, his hit rate on that play was tremendous. It really was like a running back running it. Like, that's how good he was at it. And so, again, we run a lot of bubbles. We run a lot of screens. The Commanders do. The other thing that he did was, like, there was a couple times where they're running, like, what I would call spot, corner, sit, flat, and he's wide open, catches the ball, and he breaks that off for 40 yards. And just having a guy who is that physically strong and that dynamic, and again, he's got to be healthy, he's got to be in shape. All those things have to hit. But I do think, like, if you get, again, even a version, it's not like, I heard a lot of people saying, oh, we need to get the version from 2021. No.
That dude's never coming back.
If you get the dude from 2023, you're stoked offensively. If you're Cliff Kingsbury, you're stoked with this, because again, it just raises the floor of the stuff that you do so well, the stuff that Jaden does so well. And I think about how accurate and quick Jaden is with the football. like that's going to help him be a better version of himself, which is also very exciting. So initially I was kind of like, oh, he's a little bit older, a little bit banged up, a little bit overweight, like didn't play well last year. But then I thought about it and I was like, this could be a really, really nice fit. And again, it's got to work out, but it could be a really, really nice fit for the Commanders.
Here's the other thing with the Commanders and the way they run their offense. The versatility to do different stuff formationally without changing the people on the field, right? Not the same personnel, but or same people, what feels to the defense like different personnel. That was a huge feature for them last year. Is Eckler a receiver or a running back? Is Zach Ertz a receiver or a tight end? Like, how are we treating him? Deebo can play running back. Deebo can play receiver. He can play outside. He can play inside. Like, what do you treat him as? And that was the whole idea of getting Ben Sinnott. Is he a fullback or is he a tight end? Like it's another chess piece where they can go without changing personnel while in hurry up from two backs in the backfield. Either one is a fullback, running back, or two tailbacks back there, to 5 wide without changing anybody, without subbing, making sure the defense can't sub either, and trying to get optimal looks to run the football or optimal looks to pass the football, depending on which one they catch the defense in. So like it is the kind of piece that Cliff was unbelievable at using last year. And again, if they get even 2023 version of Deebo, then it's the best version of that piece that they've probably had. And they, again, had a top 10 offense and went to the NFC Championship game last year.
And I think also like one of the things we've talked about too is just like making sure you can compete with better teams as you move into 2025. And I think this is again, if he plays the way he did in 2023, this is going to do that for you. It raises the floor of your offense. Again, remember, explosive plays lead to touchdown. You've got a guy who can generate explosive plays in the context of your offense as it currently exists. And so I think that's where I get really excited thinking of that with Cliff. And I get excited thinking about Cliff and Cliff's ability to seemingly identify what people do well, understanding how to use John Bates, understanding how to use Zach Ertz, Terry McLaurin, Austin Eckler, right? Understanding how to use OZ, like the route tree kind of changes when it's Noah Brown or when it's OZ or when it's Diami. Like that's a skill, man. And that really helps maximize. So that's another thing that makes me feel very confident is saying like, oh, he's a versatile chess piece that I don't think could go anywhere. But I do think coming here with this offense and this offensive staff can help mold and find a role for him and help build a relationship between him and Jaden in the context of what they already do that's going to maximize not only Deebo, but the entire offense.
All right, so let's address the elephant in the room. What do we make of the conditioning issues he's had and some of the other, the things that have made him available?
Yeah, I mean, you got to trust that. I think that's one of the reasons you're not, like I just read an article before we got on about how like they're not going to give him an extension, right? Extension's kind of pending or whatever. I think that's smart. I think you want to kind of find ways to motivate him as best as possible. I think they're saying if I'm Adam and I have no idea what Adam's saying, but like if I'm him, if I'm putting the GM hat on, I would say like, hey man, we love what you're doing. We really want to make sure we get the best you. We want to give you an extension, but you need to show us that you're willing and motivated to get this done. And I think that's probably smart with a guy like this because, I know a lot of people because I played there for a little bit. I know a lot of people there on the staff and in the locker room. They say Deebo's a great dude, but the weight issue is a conversation that comes up every time I talk to them. Right? It's just something that he's going to have to deal with. And I've played with guys. You've probably coached people that it's just part of the deal, right? And like you as a staff and as a community here in Washington, you have to understand that. And so how do you make sure he's motivated to be in shape and keep the weight off and stay in shape for the season? Because that's a big deal, man. Because when you watch him at certain points in his career, you can tell he's getting a little heavy. You can tell he's a little bit lighter, and it really affects how he plays, So again, like talking with Santana about it, Santana was a guy that later in his career had issues with his weight. He's like, it's a big deal. You just got to find that thing that motivates you to be the best version of yourself. And so that's something that, again, you trust Dan, you trust the strength staff, you trust the athletic training staff that they can find ways to communicate and motivate him and help him with his goals. Because ultimately, if he's that guy that we saw at points in 2023, man, like this is definitely going to be worth it.
Here's the other thing I'll say too on this issue, like, and this is extraordinarily human on top of being something from an athletic standpoint, like weight management, especially once you're not 22 anymore, like it's hard. It's really, really hard. And I've dealt with like when I've had different performance goals and trying to drop or add weight. I've had clients, same thing on the fitness side of things. And sometimes it's not really motivation. Sometimes it's routine and strategy, right? It's not, hey, dude, like you got contract dangling out there. And sometimes it is. It's not like sometimes there is that relationship. And look, disordered eating and stuff is like a whole separate thing. So like on the general population, we're dealing with something that's much more serious often. And athletes, it can be as well. So it's worth saying that on like a human level, but like a lot of it can just be strategy of, okay, can we set you up with the routine that works for you? It's not necessarily playing into your motivation. It's like, okay, what do you need? What works for your body? Here's the meal plan. Can we get you a chef? Can we, all right, we'll have these meals available for you at the facility. And then can you, when you're not at the facility, can you either have the chef or get it delivered, or can your wife cook? Like, can you cook? Like however it is that you got to get it done. It's just getting the strategy right. And hopefully here they can do that. Again, it's part strength staff and part of the workout size. But really, if we're talking about weight, it's probably more diet. And discipline, and that comes again to the strategy of setting up a plan that works for the player and the athlete. And I know, where Deebo works out. I know who he works out with down there at Exos. Nick Hill is one of the absolute best, and they have a tremendous relationship down there. So, like, what is Deebo doing to make sure that when he's at Exos down in Phoenix, or when he's whatever else he is this offseason, when he eventually moves here, that he has the resources and the plan to stick to that at this stage of his life as he enters his 30s, now at age 29, where we all know that the metabolism starts to slow a little bit, and that's just a reality of being a human being, and being a professional athlete does not change that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when I say strength staff, like they have an RD on staff there that works with them, right? So like that's a big deal.
Registered dietitian for those not in the acronym loop.
So I do think the Washington Commanders, like, Chad, the whole staff there, they're really well equipped to handle this stuff. And so again, that environment, and also the environment that Dan has done a great job cultivating, Adam's relationship with him, I think that all is going to help him be the best version of himself. I think also being motivated is a big deal, maybe not with the weight, but just from a play standpoint. So I think all those things will factor in. And, I think also Dan's done a great job with guys who are a little bit older, a little bit more tread on the tire. And I don't want to be saying that like Deebo's old, but his play style kind of lends it to being a little bit older, but he understands, like, look at how Zach Ertz kind of has this resurgence here, because they do a great job of kind of saying, hey, you need to take a vet day, you need to take a rest day. We need to take kind of a walkthrough day for you. Same thing with Bobby. And I think you could kind of put him in a similar bucket, again, to make sure that he's at his best for this season. So I'm really excited. Ultimately, if they use him the way I think they will use him, and I have the utmost confidence Cliff understands that as well, just because he's such a smart guy. So I think this environment here is perfect for him. And I think it's going to help maximize him and maximize this offense, which is ultimately the goal.
All right. So to summarize, there's the negatives, the positives, everything. Net, what are the Commanders getting in Deebo Samuel?
Yeah, so I think about one of the things that I found, worrisome is the wrong word, but just kind of a red light, when you're kind of looking at the data, right? This is, again, they outperformed the data. They did a great job. Super impressed with Jaden and the offense in general, right? But when you look at one of the things that just was a little bit worrisome is the number of kind of 18 play drives, 16 play drives, right? Those are traditionally not things that you can maintain over the course of the year, right? And so, talked to our buddy Sam Fortier. He sent me some stats because he's so good at that stat stuff. And I was like, where did they rank in terms of explosive passing plays? They were 30th in the NFL last year, right? Whew. Which means that they had to go on all of these long drives, right? They had to
then convert in the red zone, which is really hard.
Again, so now you've added a piece that can manufacture explosives, right? We just talked about how we had 26 in 2023 and 19 last year. And again, these are not like deep downfield shots. They kind of come off stuff that you do already. So you can still do the same high percentage stuff that Jaden Daniels is great at, but now you could just kind of tip that deck in your favor a little bit more and say, we don't have to be super consistent, because Deebo can find us one explosive, two explosives. I mean, yeah, 2 explosives a game, right? And for him, they're 30-yard gains on a 5 yard out. Like that's the type of stuff we're talking about here. And so that's the thing that I think makes this feel like such a natural fit. Is one of the weaknesses offensively last year was the lack of consistent explosives down the field. And now you've got a guy who, within the context of what you were doing last year, can provide those explosives. And I think that's the thing that gets me so excited is it's like you've identified a weakness, you're aware of the weakness. Again, it speaks to Adam, Dan, Cliff, the whole staff, and they say, this is a piece that helps us with this right now.
Right. And it's low risk stuff. It's not like you're having to chuck the ball 60 yards down the field. It's like, hey, we're going to try to hit a screen, or hey, we're going to hit a slant. Oh, darn, he didn't break the tackle. It's a 4-yard gain. Like, okay, we're in 2nd and 6. Excellent. Like, we can take with that. So those types of things are great. And yeah, again, the awareness that they have and the holes they try to fill, how he fits with Terry too. Like they're very, very different receivers in a way that's beautifully complementary. And then I think it's going to be fun to see how they fill in the gaps in free agency. By the way, free agency opens March 12th is the official date of the league year. So I think the 10th then is the legal tampering period. All these dates are jumbling in my head, but I know the 12th is the start of the league year. So look for the Commanders to announce this trade then when the league year officially opens here in a couple of weeks. Take command, Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here, fresh off our trips to Indianapolis for the NFL Combine. And that means, Logan, it's time for a Combine recount. And instead of doing winners and losers like everyone else does, or trying to do every position group, like there's plenty of pods doing that, including many that our friends do that'll do a great job. Trevor and Dame Brugler and all these folks that we talked to last week. So what I wanted to do was try to organize this in a way that's like, who actually moved the needle for themselves at the Combine? Who had a good enough, bad enough, or somewhere in the middle that we're trying to make sense of it enough Combine that it's really worth talking about what they did. And then we'll put this information to use with another mock draft, maybe as soon as later in the week. The first guy that I want to talk about is someone who's been mocked to Washington in multiple mocks, and who I think had one of the most interesting combines because he ran extremely well, but did not jump very well in terms of the other explosive stuff. And that's James Pierce, the edge out of Tennessee. Ran, I think it was a 4.47, but the vert wasn't very good. The broad jump wasn't very good. What do we do with James Pierce's combine, and what does that do in terms of his potential to fall to Washington and whether or not they'd want to take him?
Yeah, so his I got the numbers right here. So he ran a 4.50 on his first one and 4.57 on his second one. He had a 31-inch vertical, and then he had a 10.3 broad jump, but his first one was a 9.8. So just to kind of give that some context, obviously, dude is incredibly explosive. Like he ran a fast 40, right? Which is really important. Sorry, I just hit my mic. But I do think like some of those jump metrics are a little bit concerning because again, you'd like to see if you run a 4.5, you'd like to see about a 35 to 39 inch broad or a vertical jump, right? You'd like to see a broad jump that's kind of in that 10.5 to 10.9 kind of range, right? And again, so there's obviously some explosiveness to him. It's just manifesting itself only in the 40, right? I'm trying to look up his 10 here. I can't find it.
1.56. I got it.
1.56, which is pretty good. Like,
yeah, it's pretty good. It's not elite, but it's also not. It's like 1.4. If that's a 1.4 something, like now we're talking. 1.56 is still pretty darn good though.
Yeah. So like basically like 1.55 is kind of the mark you're looking for. So it's not like he's crazy off of that, but like you said, like the elite ones are 1.52, 1.49, like so. Obviously,
and especially for an edge, a guy who like then is all of a sudden to turn it on and get top speed to make up the fact that now we're like, wait, you ran a 4.47 and you only ran a 1.56, like that's top end speed, which is great to have as like a track guy, but you're an edge player. I care about your explosiveness way more.
Yeah, and so I think the thing about this, like, is you got to put this in context, right? So, he's 6'5 1/4, he's 245, he's got 32 3/4 inch arms, so everything kind of fits the bill. And on film, man, he's electric. He's got the juice. Is he the most refined pass rusher of all time? No, but does he kind of fit that Dan Quinn mold of guy? He talked about in his press conference, he was like, oh, I want guys that can get to the spot, that can beat you to the spot. And that's quite frankly like how he wins. And so get off on the field is slightly different than get off in a 40. And so what I would say there is like the really great guys, like the guy that comes to mind is like Von Miller. They probably have a great 10. They do. But the thing that makes them elite is their ability to anticipate the snap count, right? They have different tells, different things. Like I remember playing with Elvis Dumerville, who was great at this. Like he'd like watch the quarterback's fingers from under the center's butt, and different quarterbacks had different hand carriages, like when they were in the gun, and guys would like twitch their pinkies before the ball would come. So he'd get off on the twitch. And so there's that. And so whatever mythical thing he's doing on the field, James Pierce Jr. has a great get off, right? He has a great get off that executes on the field, right? And I think the numbers here support it well enough. Like, would I have liked better numbers? Sure. But I think I also marry that with the on-field drills, which, sometimes the broadcast doesn't do a great job showing. And he moves like a DB. Like, he just moves so effortlessly. He bends. He's got great feet. So when you kind of put the whole aggregate of the workout together in conjunction with the film, you're like, this dude's going to be, there's no question about his athleticism, I guess, at the next level. Like, he's kind of answered all of those boxes with the workout, with, again, the fast 40. And the second broad jump's decent. It's not terrible. So you kind of say all that plus the film, I kind of feel like he's no longer going to be available for Washington at 29. But, crazy things happen. And again, like, the other important thing to note here is there's a lot of stuff that comes out in medical and comes out in the meetings that is not going to show up on my little spreadsheet here. So,
right.
That's another thing to consider.
Do you think some teams will, ultimately, does this work out increase the chances that he falls to 29 because some teams will have too many worries about the numbers, or does it decrease it because you think teams will take in what you did, which is an overall athleticism through the on-field workouts, et cetera?
I think for me, it decreases it, right? I kind of thought, that he was going to kind of slip down and kind of be there because his production was lacking. Is he a top flight athlete? And again, these numbers, 31-inch vertical is not great. If I'm his agent, I probably would have said, don't do it, because the other stuff's probably fine. But I think it kind of keeps him in that probably 25 to 15 kind of range for me, at least in my mind. And if he slipped to 29, I think that'd be, as long as the person fits with what Washington's trying to do,
right,
I think would be great for kind of Dan Quinn's vision of elite edge rushers. And like I said, he's like he's my fifth or sixth guy, and I like him a lot. And again, so I kind of see him in that Washington range, but I do think nationally after this, he's going to get a little bit more buzz, a little bit more juice. That's what happens when you run a fast 40. I talked to a couple scouts, out and about in Indy. And one of the things they said is I'm going to go back and watch him tonight. So it just gets more eyes back on him. Kind of they watch more film, they watch more games. And I think when you watch his 2023 stuff, you're going to be like, yeah, he's a top 20 type guy in the NFL draft. Now, there's 2024, which is different, but I think it's going to kind of make people say through further examination that they'd be comfortable with taking him a little bit higher.
All right. We got 10 guys to get through. Pierce is probably the most interesting because of the discrepancy, but we got 9 more guys that we're going to roll through here that we thought their combine means something, especially relative to where they could or couldn't fall to the Commanders. Next guy up, all he did was run, and that's all he needed to do. Matthew Golden goes out and runs a 4.29. This is a guy that at 5'11", 191, not the prototypical big, receiver opposite Terry necessarily that you're looking for, but we know the Commanders needed to add juice. Absolutely a guy that if he's available at 29, you're going to take. I think after running a 4.29, probably not going to be available for Washington.
Yeah, I don't think at all. I never thought he'd be available there, quite honestly.
He was mocked to them, so this isn't crazy.
No, it's not crazy. Yeah. But in terms of I do my own thing. I watch my own stuff. I had him as the third receiver, and so that third guy usually goes anywhere between kind of 22 and, let's say 12. And I think that when you look at him, I heard the comp of Stephon Diggs, I got a little bit of Antonio Brown just from how he runs. He's that smaller guy, but hyper quick in the short area. He can run every route. He's competitive at the catch point. And the one question is what kind of vertical horsepower does he have? He looks fast on film, but how fast is he really? And you come out and run a 4.29. It's no more questions about that, So I think again, I love his film. I think he's really talented. And I think he's a great workout guy. I think all that stuff shows up, but the 4.29 really cements it for me.
All right, so Golden probably not going to be available for the Commanders. One guy that I have seen mocked to them end of the first round, who we knew would just be probably the freak of all freaks at the Combine, is Nick Amanawari, the safety from South Carolina. And I think Lance Erline on NFL.com says his comparison, one-to-one player is Jeremy Chin. So obviously we for all these guys, Amanawari, anybody else, Golden, anybody we're talking about, Pierce, we don't know what happened in the interviews. We don't know what happened character. So like before we get enamored with Nick Manowari's numbers, especially because his numbers are insane, it's worth pointing out that we're doing this based off numbers, and that's kind of the point of this segment. But always remember, based off of last year, especially what we learned from the Commanders, that the character and who they are matters as much or more than any of this. So with that, let's look at Nick Manowari's numbers and go, oh my God. 4.38 40, 1.49 10-yard split. He jumped 43 inches vertically, and then 11.6 best at the combine broad jump. And by the way, knocked out 20 bench reps at 6'3", 220 with 32 and a quarter inch arms. So some pretty long arms for a safety, pretty big wingspan, and he still knocked out 20 bench press reps at 225. This dude athletically is a freak.
Yeah, I mean, he looks like a superhero. Like watching him run, it was like it didn't look right because it's like not like he's super technical, right? It's not like he's like a super technical sprinter. Like you can tell, like with Golden, for example, like he's run track. They've gotten the start. They like know how to do kind of the first, I forget it is like 10 steps. You're down, looking at the ground, then you kind of slowly rise up and like the transitions and all that stuff. He's not that. He's just a big old horse, that's fast and strong and crazy explosive. And it shows up on film. Like if you want to watch something fun, go watch Nick. How do you say his last name? Manowari.
I believe it's Manowari.
Yeah, Manowari. Go watch his highlights on YouTube and watch him on his interceptions specifically, and watch him just outrun everyone for touchdowns, like everyone. And it's like he's fast, man. He tracks the ball well. He's got some good man-to-man coverage stuff on film. It's so funny. Like I was not very high on him prior to this. And I was like, man, why do I think he's terrible? And I realized that I had watched his worst game graded by PFF through the year. That was the one game I watched, was the Alabama game. And I was like, And so then everyone's like, you should watch a different game besides that one because he's better in those. So again, like
he's better than his worst performance. Aren't we all?
Yeah. And so, I mean, he's a freak, man. And I think the thing about him is he's like that gets me a little bit worried is like, what do you do with him? Do you play him in the post? Do you play him in line? Do you play him like kind of as a pseudo linebacker nickel player? And we've seen how guys that have a hard time with that, the NFL specifically has a hard time finding a home for guys like that. So I think he's a true safety. I think a lot of people are going to think, we can play him as like a nickel linebacker and do some different stuff with him like you can with Jeremy Chin. I'm not sure he's there yet. But again, like the testing is crazy. I think he definitely tested himself into a first round player. Definitely.
Yeah. And obviously Washington there at 29. It's a direction they could go. Now, if they re-sign Chin to a long-term deal, I don't know if it's the best use of the pick, but you can, with an athlete like that, on some level, you maybe just figure it out. Speaking of crazy athletes, next guy, Armand Membu. This guy's there was a chance maybe going in of some bad testing, whatever. I don't know, some injuries history came out that he could fall. This dude is probably not getting out of the top 10 at this point.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have now moved him up to their top offensive lineman. Lance at NFL.com has him as his top offensive lineman now, ahead of Campbell, ahead of all the other dudes. This dude, I mean, he's 20 years old, and
that's crazy.
He has a great maturity about the way that he plays. He came in 6'4", 332, 33.5-inch arms, ran a 4.91 vertical jump 34, a 9.7 broad jump, and 31 bench press reps. Holy bejesus, Logan. Armand Membu.
Yeah, so crazy. Like the arm length's good. The weight was crazy. For him to run that at 332 was crazy, man. Like, and then so you're like, maybe he's just kind of straight line fast. It shows up a little bit on film, but then you watch him in the drills and he looks so like there's certain times like last year or 2 years ago, like where you're watching what is a first round offensive lineman and they just look different and better than everybody else. And that's how you felt watching the drill work with him. I mean, I just was like, the way he moves, how light he's on his feet. Like, I don't know, he's probably a tackle now, I think for sure, based on these athletic measurements and like based on the athletic testing and the measurements. But I kind of feel like I could see some teams moving him ahead of Will Campbell because Will Campbell looked great. He ran well. He looked well in the drills, but the problem is he looks smaller, right? When you put him next to Membu, like Membu just has this physical presence that I think a lot of teams are going to get infatuated with. And I do think Will Campbell could play tackle, but I think he's probably a guard. And I talked to a guy, out at Prime 47. He was like, you know what? Like, I think he's a guard and I'm not drafting a guard in the top 10. And I was like, okay. And so there is that.
So it
school
wasn't
of thought.
Scott McLuhan.
Yeah. No, it was not Scott McLuhan. But and I think the same conversation is true for Banks too, the guy from Texas. The fact that this is a tackle measurement guy, he is a tackle. You can definitely give him a shot there. The size, the strength, the physicality. I think you might see people flip and have him in the top 10 and move some of those other guys down the list a little bit, which is crazy because it's been Will Campbell and Banks this entire time. But that's what this event can do when you get everybody together and see them right next to each other. You say, man, that's the one that looks like these other guys did from years past.
For sure. So he's not on the table for Washington. This guy might be, though. Josh Connerly, offensive tackle out of Oregon. First of all, he's huge. 6'5", 311, 33.5-inch arms. He also has just meat hook hands. 10 3/8 on the hand size, whatever that's worth. Ran a 5.05 40, 171 split, so pretty good for reference. Membu ran faster 40, but was a 176, I think, 179.
Yeah, a little slow.
10-yard split, 34.5-inch vertical, only an 8.7 broad jump, which is obviously not that great. Easy for me to say, being 6'5", 311. But kind of numbers a bit all over the place in terms of some explosive traits, some it's not showing. What do you make of Josh Connerly out of the combine, and what would you think of him at 29 for Washington?
Yeah, I definitely think you see his explosiveness. Like when you watch him in the 40, when you watch him in the drills, like the 10, I think speaks to that. The vertical speaks to that. He's a little bit, to be tight in his hips, and I think that shows up in the broad jump a little bit, like when you watch him do the broad jump. So I think when you watch his film, he's like just incredibly solid, and I think he feels to me like one of the only guys in this class that is a true tackle, like undisputedly. And so, I think he ran like a tackle. I think he moves like a tackle. I think the athletic ceiling isn't as high as some of these other guys, like, the Josh Simmons or, even the Membus, for example. But I think he would be a good, solid starting left or right tackle in the NFL. And I think when you look at his film, he's a guy that is detailed, he's passionate, he's physical. And I think he can grow into his frame a little bit, which is also very exciting. But yeah, that's kind of like my thought on him. And I think he's a guy that I just, after watching the offensive lineman, feels like, because of the position that he plays and how he tested, a really solid selection, and there's a really solid opportunity he'd be there for the Commanders at 29, I think. And that's why we're talking about him, is because like Membu, I think, is completely out of the conversation now. Connerly feels like he might still be in that conversation, and we're going to, as we get more kind of general information about the person, the character, but that's one, if the Commanders don't make a move in free agency, that I'd say that could be their pick at 29.
For sure. Okay, that's the first 5 of our 10 guys that moved the needle at the combine. Quick break, come back. We'll get to our second 5, including a couple more offensive linemen to keep your eye on for Washington. Take Command Podcast, Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here. 5 more guys for you coming out of the combine that we think move the needle for themselves one way or the other. Okay, we said Josh Connerly is a big man. That's all relative, because next to Jalen Travis, nobody's a big man. 6'8", 339, 34 7/8 inch arms. Some impressive explosive numbers in terms of a 9.4 broad jump, but also pair that with a 1.8 10-yard split and a 5.1 40. So this is a guy that we're not necessarily looking at for 29, right? This is a guy that we're potentially looking at a little bit later. You bet on the athlete. What do you like about him? Why was he on your list?
So I think that's exactly right. I think as he's gone through the Senior Bowl, as you watch his film, like, he's just been a guy that seems to be. He went to Iowa State, from Princeton to Iowa State. And you say, what does an NFL offensive lineman look like? And Jalen Travis looks like that guy. The arm length, the size, the general movement skills are all there. You see the athletic kind of explosive ability in the broad jump, in the vertical jump. Didn't he jump 35 inches on the vertical, something like that?
Yeah, 35. So yeah, the jump numbers were pretty good.
Solid vertical, and he's got a little bit of kind of like lurch to him when he runs. He's got there's a little bit of stiffness, kind of, he lands like a little bit heel first, but he's an athlete now. And when you say like the length coupled with the general movement skills, like as a guy later, developmental prospect potentially, let's say they do something, the Commanders do something in free agency, and you see, oh man, Jalen Travis is available in the end of in the 4th round, for example. I would definitely be willing. I'd be stoked if the Commanders took that shot on him because, again, like when you watch his film, like some guys don't use their length well when they punch, right? They kind of let the guys get in on their chest. They don't punch well, and he uses his length aggressively, and he's athletic enough to kind of get back. He can cut people off in the run game. So again, just height, weight, measurement stuff coupled with the Senior Bowl. I think this is a really interesting kind of prospect, and I would expect a lot of teams to be more excited about him coming out of this process because since the season, his entire offseason process has been really fantastic.
Another big fella, 6'6", 336 is the size for Anthony Belton, 33 and 7/8 inch arms. But the numbers in terms of the testing, not great. 5'2", 640, 182 10-yard split, 29.5 vertical, 8'11 broad, and he ran the 3-cone in 7.77. So he hits jackpot on that, which is nice. Logan, why did he make this list for you? He's a guy that I know a lot of people are really intrigued by.
Yeah, and I think he's intriguing. And I think nothing about these testing numbers for a guy who's 336, 340 pounds, like are off, right? 29-inch vertical, 29.5, 30-inch vertical, that's fine, right? 5'2", 40, that's fine too. And I think you see that he's got some athletic ability. Like when you watch him in the drills, there's like a smoothness and a fluidity to him. And when you watch the film, that shows up, and his ability to kind of track and play basketball in space. And so, like, again, like I am attracted to larger people, and the combine is for that. It lets you see these measurables, right? We talked about arm length. This guy's got 34-inch arms. He's just a big old hoss. And I think about that in terms of the athletic profile that he showed. Same thing with Jalen Travis. Big athletic people, especially later, right? Like end of the second, the third round, whatever that is, right? After that, like as a guy that's developmental, you say this guy could be a starter one day based on the film, based on the testing. And for him, really the thing that caught my eye was the field work, right? He was in the same group as Banks and Will Campbell in terms of drills. And your eye naturally sees Will Campbell's a beast. Banks is like a little disappointing, little stiff. And then Belton gets up there. He's like a full, almost 2 inches taller than Banks. He's kind of built the same way. He just moves so well through the pulls and stuff. You're like, that's just a big dude who moves well. And I like big dudes who move well, And again, there's some technical stuff on film, but I think that's the thing that catches your eye about him is just the athletic kind of frame movement skills coupled with the film, coupled with the rawness. And you say, man, that's an NFL offensive lineman. We just got to kind of shine him up a little bit.
Yeah, and I also wonder, like a guy like that or a guy like Travis, can you take him this year, sit him behind Wiley?
Exactly.
And then next year, that's your starter. But he's there. He's ready to go. He gets to learn behind a pro's pro in Wiley. He's getting coached up. It doesn't necessarily have to be your, hey, let's kick Brandon Coleman inside and start this guy at left tackle right now situation. Like this can be a long-term investment in the way that like the Eagles are always a year ahead of what they need. Because again, Andrew Wiley, can you save $10 million by cutting him? Yeah, but then you got to go find someone better for less than $10 million to make that worth it. And so that's kind of the questions they're asking internally right now in terms of the O-line room.
I think that's a great point. I think that's exactly what both those two guys are. They're guys that the reason I point them out is because I think they can be NFL starters given time to grow and time to marinate. And ultimately that's what you're looking for with offensive linemen specifically, right? It's so hard to find guys that can physically do it. There's guys that are, Will Campbell, who's one of the better offensive line prospects in the last 3 or 4 years, is probably going to play guard in the NFL, right? So finding guys that have this tackle ability, the tackle length, the tackle size, the tackle movement skills that you could kind of redshirt for a year that could end up starting. And these are just two guys. There's guys like Ozzie Trapillo from Boston College who could also be in the same bucket if you want a different name. But I just think it's good to call attention to how you build a team. And I think that's kind of what we're pointing out here is like these guys crush the combine from a measurement movement standpoint. And so when you see that, you're like, teams see it too. And they say, okay, let's see if we can get your red shirt. And then we have a guy that's going to start at right tackle for 10 years or maybe left tackle. Like that's the other thing about both of them. Because of the measurements, they really fit those.
All right, last three guys. Back to the freak show category. Landon Jackson. Oh, my goodness. The edge from Arkansas. He measured in at 6'6", 264. He's got 33 and a quarter inch arms, by the way. So he's big, he's long, he's strong, and boy, is he fast and explosive. 4.68 in the 40, a 1.65 10-yard split. A 40.5-inch vertical and a 10.9 broad jump. Wow.
Yeah, and again, like I said this before, he's one of my favorite players.
Yeah, you like
watch.
the violence, you like the intensity, you like the way he plays on tape, and then he did all this stuff.
Yeah, and I think like to see him do that, like I knew he was twitchy, I knew he was explosive, but you don't know how, right? Because he's a little bit tight in the hips, has a hard time bending, but then you see him like run people down, and all those metrics all of a sudden make sense. He's a big athletic dude, and he plays with the requisite violence. So he was a guy that I kind of saw going, in the second round, upper half of the second round. I thought, man, Washington's probably going to miss out on him because it's going to be. It's kind of a little bit too early for 29.
There'll be someone better at 29, but he's not going to be available at whatever that second pick is.
60. And so I think with a performance like this, maybe that changes the narrative around him. Maybe, and again, like if they pick Landon Jackson, if they pick Connerly, if they really any of those first guys we talked about, Armanwari, Golden, Pierce, if they picked any of those guys at 29, you feel great. And now I think Landon Jackson with this performance, you say, shoot, like I'd be okay with him at 29. Like because of. Not just because of the workout, it's because of how he plays and because of the size and physicality that he brings. So I think the workout just probably bumped him up a couple notches on a couple of people's boards and took him from that, what is that, 32 to 45, 50 range. And now maybe we're in the 25 to 40 range, And so again, like that's where the Commanders are picking, and maybe you feel good about it.
For sure. Or can they potentially trade out of the first round, to the early second, get to 34, 35, and then get him there. That would be sweet. All right, 2 Oregon Ducks to finish out. First one, Derek Harmon, the defensive tackle out of Detroit, Michigan, found his way out to Oregon, 6'4.5", 313, big long arms, big giant hands, and a 4.95 40 with a 1.74 split. Who knows? Maybe defensive tackle is on their radar for post John Allen era. There, would he be a guy that's a 29 selection, or is he looking more second, third round?
I was hoping second round. Again, I was hoping that, but again, when you come in, you measure like this, you run like this, that was the other thing. When you watch him in the drill work, he doesn't look like he's 315. He doesn't look like that. He bends really well. He plays with great length on film. He's got good athleticism. He can run stuff down, and he just feels like kind of a disruptive, longer guy that every team is looking for now, right? Everyone kind of makes the Chris Jones comp. I hate that, but in terms of measurables, like that's what the measurables look like. That kind of weight, that kind of size, that kind of length. And again, you watch him move around the field, you're like, dang, this dude's incredibly impressive. And so in terms of just getting you better in the defensive front, he can play a little bit of defensive end. I don't think you want him doing that full time. He's an interior player, but like they play like an odd front. They'll move him outside for a couple snaps. Like that's the kind of athlete that he is. But I think he could be special. I think now he's probably in the conversation at 29, but prior to this, I think people were thinking of him like a solid second round player, but that's what the combine does, man. It doesn't, let me just be clear. It's not because he worked out. It's because everyone's going to look at the workout and then go back and watch his film and be like, I didn't know he was this big, this long, this athletic at that size. I'm going to move him up because of what I'm seeing on film.
Right. Last one. His teammate at Oregon, Terrence Ferguson, maybe the best workout of all the tight ends in terms of relative to what was expected. Dude, 6'5", 247, ran a 4.63, 155 10-yard split, 39-inch vertical, and a 10.2 broad. Those are elite athletic. Like, those are good. 4.63 is a little slow for a receiver, but like not unplayable. Right. But the rest of those numbers, if those are receiver numbers, those are good. And he's a solid 6'5", almost 250 pounds.
Yeah, he's got, like, watching him in the drills, and like to be perfectly clear, like I worked a little bit with him this offseason, so I'm a little bit biased, but like you can't argue with those numbers. Objectively, those are tremendous numbers. They're the best at the combine at the position, right? And you watch him on the field, and he's got this like kind of snake-like, silky smoothness to him where he just like, I've seen really good route runners have that skill set. And then to have the horsepower to support it and the nuance. You watch him at the Senior Bowl, man, like he's making people look silly because, again, he's got this kind of ability to kind of give you these indicators and false kind of projections of what route he runs. So he's got a foundation. Now, I think his film, you'd kind of say if you watch it, you see the explosiveness. You see him make explosive plays with the ball in his hand. You see him win on routes. I think the thing about it is he's not always working as hard as he possibly can, or it looks like he's a little bit disinterested at times. But in terms of intelligence, like through my meetings with him, like I was blown away. And the physical testing's awesome. And again, we talked about Zach in free agency and how special Zach was, like, to me, this is in this kind of second round area, probably the closest guy to what Zach can do. And that's why he's interesting to me for the Commanders, right? Because like you look at Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green, he's a little bit undersized, can't really do the inline thing, ran a little slower than you thought. Then you look at Mason Taylor from LSU, who's a really good football player, but again, like more of a Y, more of like your John Bates with pass game plus upside. The kid from Texas ran a 4.98. So like kind of all that pass, you know what I'm saying? So like all of a sudden you kind of weed through that kind of second tier of tight end after Loveland and Warren. You say, man, that guy right there has got the profile and got the feel for what Zach does. So maybe if you're looking for a plus pass catcher later, this could be a good opportunity there.
Yeah, LSU kid's going to be interesting if Bates winds up signing somewhere else in free agency, though. He's got the obviously the connection with Jaden, teammates there. So.
And some people are up and down on Mason Taylor. Like I love the way that dude just competes, man. Like he's not afraid of contact. He's okay in the pass game.
Sounds like a commander.
Yeah, dude, he's a competitive, tough son of a gun. So yeah, so Mason Taylor didn't run, but like don't expect him to run super well because that's not like his thing, right?
Yeah.
Like Terrence, he's going to run because that's his thing. He's an athlete, right? So just keep that in mind. But yeah, both those guys would be really interesting. And again, like a lot of people came out of the on-field workout, thinking Mason Taylor like might be a end of the first round kind of guy. That's the conversation. So again, like tight ends are funny this year because the receiver class is a little down. Quarterbacks are a little bit down. So you're going to see some of these guys get pushed up the board a little bit, and that's what a good combine will do for you.
For sure. All right. Those are the needle movers from the combine. I think the plan for us on Thursday, as of right now, is to do a 3-round mock. So we will get back into that. All we got to do is pick for the Commanders. We don't pick everybody. Okay. Yeah, no, we're not picking 90 dudes, Logan.
All right. As long as we're on the same page there.
Who did I give the bigger heart attack to? You right there or Dane Brugler when I was like, hey, dude, the Beast is coming out next month, right? And he's like, oh, God. I was like, I don't make the rules, Dane, but you can't wait much longer. It's almost March and the draft's in April.
Right, yeah.
So...
yeah, get going on that thing. Yeah, probably Dane, honestly, because, if we had to, we could scrape through a 3-round mock, but... yeah, man, like it's a lot of picks. What is that? 90, almost 100 picks. That's tough.
McCaffrey was 99 last year, and he was second or last.
Is that right?
Pick,
wow.
I think of the third. So yeah, by the time it changes every year because of the compensatory stuff. But
right.
For Washington, it'll be 3 picks, and that third rounder. Remember, I'm going to say this basically every time we talk about this. That's Miami's pick. So we will, get a little bit sooner as opposed to having to wait all the way to the end of the first or the third round before the compensatory picks for that. But we don't have to pick all of them. We'll let the PFF draft simulator. I'll text Trevor and make sure that thing's been updated. If not, maybe we'll use someone else's. The point is, 3-round mock is, I think, the temporary plan. But if the Commanders make more news, plans are subject to change. So. Subscribe, everybody, and then whatever happens, it'll be in your feed. For Logan, who you can follow on Instagram at Logan_Paulsen82. I'm Craig Hoffman. The other thing that actually is an option, maybe we will wind up saving the mock for next week. We did not get a chance to, because of schedules, do our crossover episode with Trey with the Best. So that is something we still are going to do because we've actually gotten some really good like training / health questions when it comes to the Eagles had a bunch of healthy dudes this year. How can the Commanders do that? Obviously with Deebo and the weight talk, like I'm sure we can talk about that. So we still will do that episode. I know it's one that a lot of folks were looking forward to. It just schedule-wise didn't work out in Indy, but that one's coming. So with that, we'll do one of those 2 things on Thursday. We'll do the other one next week. Keep sending in your mailbag questions, although we do have a couple stacked up. And we'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.